The motion to Deputy Mayor Brosnan to give us, substantiate. Thank you.
Thank you. So just for everyone's benefit, I'll read through the motion that we've got to, and as I've said, happy for there to be any amendments or changes to that workshopped before it's seconded formally into a motion. Right, so I would like to move that the Sustainable Napier Committee receive the National Aquarium detailed business case, receive the National Aquarium and Ocean Centre concept design, note Council's view that this project is of national significance and has outgrown our capacity to resource and lead. Note our support and endorsement for the concept and this facility's ongoing presence in Napier. Confirms it will not further the project as set out in the detailed business case without government capital support of a minimum of $35 million to be reported back to Council along with recommendations on the next step. Approve the high-level communications and engagement plan and commence community engagement following government endorsement as detailed in Part E. Resolve to apply to the appropriate, to the Ministry of Business, Employment and Innovation, MB Provincial Growth Fund and other government funds for funding pending meetings with relevant ministers. I welcome any thoughts on those.
Do we have a seconder for that, please?
Oh, did you want to continue to work the resolution before we took a seconder?
Did you?
Yeah, just through you, Mr Mayor. Through you, Mr Mayor.
Comes with the seat, eh?
If there were any other thoughts from councillors on that wording, I think it would be good to take those before moving and having to make amendments.
Councillor Mawson.
Through the chair, my only issue would be if specifying the 35 million would be that if we did have an amount from the government, we've not even looked at other people for that money prior to saying, nah, that's it. And I'm just wondering, we've talked about, Antoinette talked about there are people that could be interested with a lot of money, and for them 35 million might be chump change. I'm just thinking at this level, at this committee level, is it actually worthwhile just saying we need government support and seeing where it leads? That's all I'm saying. That we could have 70 million come from another source. And I think probably more importantly is that we actually get the government saying that they will back it on an ongoing level.
Basis. Yeah, I think you make a really good point through you, Mr Chair, if I'm happy to give some context to the wording of the motion. So what I've set up there is that we will not proceed without $35 million of funding from the government. However, we've put in there that that's to be reported back to Council, what the government's answer is essentially, and that then we make a decision on next steps. So I think the debate around if the government is not prepared to invest up to that level, what happens next, that comes at a later stage after we get an answer. So that's why that motion is written to be reported back to Council along with recommendations on a next step. So I'm not saying this is not killing the project if they don't put 35 million in, it's saying this Council needs to have another debate if they don't.
Happy with that?
Yes, thank you.
So, I'm working my way around, yeah.
Mine was an extension, anyway, thank you. Through you, Miss, just an extension on that same question from Councillor Mawson. And even depending on the dollar value we get from government, that doesn't limit or prohibit our philanthropists from giving more or less. So they still have the freedom to be as generous as they want.
Yeah, I'd just like to... The government support of $35 million still leaves $40 million to be raised through sponsorship or other areas. So those other avenues, philanthropy, other organisations, iwi organisations, all of those others could then come into the 40 million that is needed. For the project to proceed, we still need that base funding from government to a minimum of $35 million.
Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, I think it's the word minimum, through you, Mr Chair. I think if that word was removed, what we're really talking about is talking to the government about 35 million, seeing what they come back with, and then we've got a discussion. At the moment, we're saying minimum 35 million, and I think that following on from Councillor Mawson's point, it's about the concept of funding as opposed to specificity at the moment. If somebody else came up, if philanthropists were to exceed the 40 million, then the government doesn't need to contribute 35 million. But
If we build it bigger,
So my point is whether the word minimum is appropriate.
okay, have you got a comment to that? 'Cause
I'll listen to the rest. I do have some thoughts, but
Through the chair, I think, and we did sort of touch on it earlier and then we've missed it when we've drafted it up, I think we need a commitment from central government regarding the ongoing operational costs and supporting in some capacity with that. So,
do you want to add that in now?
yeah, I'll ponder on that as well.
yeah,
Okay.
and it's very good at bringing the words together.
Yeah, she'll have it ready shortly. Councillor Brown.
Just a clarification on F in terms of what that means. So if we approve the high-level communications engagement plan now and then commence community engagement following government endorsement as detailed in Part E, does that detail include the recommendations on next step, or is commencing community engagement just part of the recommendations of the next steps anyway, so we could just take it out? So it could just be approve the high-level and communications engagement plan, and then included in the recommendations of the next steps will obviously be the community engagement. Or am I reading that?
I think there's a comma missing, possibly in E, after million with.
Just in terms of process, because of the way that the recommendation's written in terms of getting the government support and then reporting back, you wouldn't be able to start the engagement until you've actually reported back on that anyway.
Okay, so it's covered.
Cool. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes?
Could I just ask that the Deputy Mayor considers in E that we have some recommendation around ongoing operational cost as well, because at this point in time, it's not, we haven't got anything covered in there.
Yes, I'll draft that now.
He's pondering that one, how it goes in. Anyone else?
Isn't it your committee?
While we have said in one of the recommendations that we see this as a project of national significance, we need the government to accept that it's a project of national significance also, and to legislate that. So I think we're missing a key thing that we need from the government as part of their support of it.
Did you hear that?
I didn't. I apologise.
So we're saying it's a project of national significance. We need the government to recognise that it's a project of national significance and legislate for that accordingly.
It could take an
Because-
awfully long time.
At the end of the day, if they're going to commit that sort of level of funding and ongoing operating costs, they're going to have to create legislation like they have for Te Papa and everything else. And so that is one of the things that we're going to require from them for moving forward.
Excuse me, through your chair, just a minor thing, Cherie.
Yes.
Employment and innovation need to be turned around. It's IE, not EI. So
What number's that?
it's G, Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. Thank you, Antoinette.
Through you, Mr. Chair, following those points from councillors, if I could work with Cherie to make some amendments inside E. Cherie, we intend to split E into bullet pointed 1, 2, 3s. So it would read, confirm it will not further the project as set out in the detailed business case without And then 1. Government capital support of 35 million. 2.
So getting rid of minimum?
Yeah.
Well, they could give us more.
Million. Next. A commitment to ongoing operational costs, noting council's preference for this to be legislated.
Is it, well, I don't know whether we need to legislate for ongoing operational costs. There is an Act of Parliament which covers Te Papa, which was established to bring in the old art gallery and those things. So there is legislation already in place of how this type of national project is administered under the Ministry of Arts and Culture. So it would be that the actual
Formation of the
of how this project is managed with the group of trustees and those sorts of things, there's legislation for that. So it's a matter of it being included in that legislation.
Could we just remove it from that space, and we'll so commitment to ongoing operational costs end, and just if you cut that out, we'll pop that in a bit
probably
later.
sits better under C, the legislative bit.
And lastly, that the conversations with government,
Is this another point? Sorry.
yeah, are to be reported back. So are to, and then the rest of that.
With government. Just a correction there. Can I make a suggestion just to clarify something, please? Councillor Brosnan?
We can note our preference. So just sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, it's probably a conversation better had that way, but the CEO was just saying whether or not we leave it open, the legislative discussion, to let the government decide how best they would like to engage in this process, rather than stipulating our preference for it to be legislated. That was the side conversation.
We don't want to further the project without the government's endorsement that this is a project of national significance. So that's the wording we need in there.
That's the key part. That's why you've got that under.
We're saying that the council's view that this project is of national significance. Now, we haven't got that we want the government's endorsement that this is a project of national significance.
So the second bullet point is from government day.
Yes.
Yeah,
you need to
the
say
conversation
that.
will be added
So you need to put that in.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Just as a suggestion in terms of what Councillor Ryder said, you could always just add that in terms of the ongoing operational cost as the project is of national, seen as of.
As the project.
In recognition that the project is of national significance.
Nice.
Good teamwork. Keith Haley.
So we got all that first. I just want
Just
to. All done.
on the
2
final
seconds.
bullet.
I'll let her get up to scratch and then we'll. That's what you wanted, Annie?
Yeah, cool. I'll just
So Hayley, you got some?
Or just grammatically, the last bullet point, should it be so the detailed business case without the conversations with government being reported back to council? Rather than are to be.
maybe just remove it as a 3 and make it a new number.
Being would cover that as well.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a query under E bullet point 2, the word project. It's not the project that'll be of national significance, it's the facility that'll be of national significance.
Fine with that change.
through the chair, E, bullet point 1, we removed the word minimum. So if the government were to support this and they gave us 35 million, that still leaves us hanging a little bit, and they're not like, when we just ask for 35 million, they're not likely to come back with 55 million. Do we need to just change the wording there to leave the options open?
I think that is reasonably open.
Excuse me, through the chair, I agree that this kind of going back to what I said originally, that we've kind of actually locked it back down again, that if we don't get 35 million, full stop, end of story. It's actually worse than what it was before in that wording.
Could we say significant government funding?
I don't agree, because if you don't have the 35 million, it could be 5 million, you know,
So would it be 35 million minimum?
Yeah.
at least 35 million.
Yeah, that gives them an opportunity to read the business case and say, well, actually, for this project, we're going to need to do 80 million. But for a government to be asked for 35 million and then give 80, it becomes target practice for them.
I'm not wanting to make any comments around the amendments, quite happy with how that's developing, Mr Chair. But as I see the motion being formed in front of us, we're asking government to consider this concept and elevate it to a national status. If that's successful, all of the follow-on steps from that, the level of contribution, the level of ongoing contribution, partnerships, etc., will be conversations that come out of a statement, yes, this is of national significance and we need to make it happen. So the semantics, for me, and I could be wrong, but getting bogged down in the details at this stage might be a little bit too soon. I think that if government comes out and says this is a concept of national significance, the steps will flow forward from there. And we'll be led by government from that point.
And I think further to that, if it took 6 months, the 35 million's probably 40 million, isn't it? So we're not future-proofing it a little bit?
Yeah, and I'd just like to make the comment that I do think that we need to be firm when we go to Wellington with the conversation about how much money is really a minimum for us to move forward with from them, a commitment of 35 million. Should they come back to us, you know, as Councillor McGrath and Mawson have said, with a lesser number, Council still has the opportunity to make a decision on next steps. You know, if government came and said, not 35 but 30, we still get to have a conversation around what next.
Yeah.
Which maybe proceed and seek philanthropist extra money.
Mr Chair, I think potentially if we added the word minimum back in, that would alleviate most of the concerns.
I'd like to think they'd have an opportunity to put more in when they look at the project rather than us tie them to an exact amount.
I've got no issue with minimum being put on the end of 35. And I'm happy to formally move the motion.
I'll second.
So just edit support of a
Minimum
minimum
35
of
million.
35 million.
Happy with that?
Yep.
That's moved by Councillor Wilson, seconded by, sorry, Deputy Mayor and Mayor White. Where's my head? You want to speak?
No, I'm happy to let the seconder take the floor.
Mayor White.
You want anything to your...
No, I think that was great teamwork, everybody, getting to that end result. And I think that reflects the desires that I've heard quite clearly expressed by all of us in the room today to enable us to move forward to the next step.
So, anybody else would like to speak on it?
I had a general comment, so can I make that comment now?
Please.
I wanted to say that I don't want to rehash anything that's gone through, we've talked about previously today, but I do share the financial concerns, so I think that rehashing our motion has been a really positive thing for us to do together today. But regardless of the outcome of the ministerial discussions, I think that it is important to acknowledge that the detailed business case combined with the supporting concept design is an asset, and it's a blueprint that we own. So that in itself holds some value, and I think it's important for us to acknowledge that. I want to compliment the work and the consideration that has gone into reflecting mana whenua and te ao Māori, And I think that it's encouraging to see this and how the cultural case contributes notably to the finished concept and the strength of the proposition. It sets an exciting precedent that their leadership is valued, and I look forward to this level of collaboration ongoing with all of our projects, especially as we are obligated to consider the well-beings.
Okay.
Right. Well spoken.
Any other comments? Deputy Mayor Brosnan. Oh,
Yes, sorry.
sorry.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I could have put my hand up a lot faster. Again, reiterate all the comments that have been forwarded by our councillors this morning, and hugely encouraged by the collaborative work that's resulted in better definition and how we go forward from this point. So fully supportive of the conversation, the intent of this motion, and our desire to place this in front of government. But for myself, I will still be speaking against the motion, not because it lacks mana or integrity, but because there are still significant concerns that I would like to see us address. It's not for us to address any longer, but it will impact on our residents. And so, as I did with the long-term plan, I think we still need to send a signal there are some concerns there, even though this is a great positive direction for us to move forward. Thank you.
I'd just like to say that having a venue like this, which is aimed at improving the conservation of our ocean, fits really well within our city. And I think it would anchor such initiatives that we've already got, like our Seawalls project. And I think as a region with one of the highest Māori populations, having an activity and a potential place of employment with such a strong cultural kaupapa, it makes a lot of sense, and I can see the real community value that it will bring, and our community and our visitors being able to be more connected with our Māori culture and values. So overall I think it's great if we can get the funding.
Thank you. Mayor, would you like to close?
Thank you for all your teamwork in pulling together what I think is a really good motion that says exactly what we mean it to say. So, thank you.
So I put the motion as up on the Deputy Mayor Brosnan's motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
1.
Carried. Just like to thank the Deputy Mayor and all the councillors and the Mayor for workshopping that motion and coming up with something that most of us were happy with.
No, it's leading by the chair too. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Right, we now move on to minor items. The Deputy Mayor had 3 items, and does anyone else have any other minor items they would like?
Thanks, ladies. Is that all good? That's all good.
Okay, we'll now Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. Just following on from the public forum, I thought it would be really beneficial to have some context from our regulatory team on what we are doing to further the district plan in relation to our retail strategy. So I was just going to ask Richard if Richard wouldn't mind coming up and commenting to us if it's appropriate, and this is part of standing orders I'm not familiar with. Cherie, you could help me if we're able to also make an action point as a result of the minor matters.
No, I think it
refer
needs to come back to another, like I think we need to
It's
give an
gonna-
indication
yeah.
for it to come back in a report to count the entire.
Right.
So
So
you
I'll-
can probably ask a question
Yeah.
that could be answered.
So I was just going to make, I was going to suggest we had an action point that the district plan make note of the concerns of the inner city business Inc. But Richard, you might have some thought.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think what might be useful is just to understand that the district plan is legislation, and as such, you have to act with the right jurisprudence. Hard word to get out, around your responsibilities in enacting a legislative responsibility. And what that does really is the district plan is a land entitlement for whoever owns that piece of land. So the difficulty with having
bodies, who feel impacted about something that's happening on that land, is that it's very hard to give certainty to those people that own that land about their investment opportunities. Say if it was your house and you have to ask your neighbour if you want to change the colour of your kitchen or what have you. That makes it really hard, and it is actually not doing our job under the RMA legislation. So it's not easy to give a third party the power of that they need to have some rights of submission, or whether or not, or that they're an affected party. That test actually needs to be clearly identified firstly in the formation of your district plan, and so if something is permitted, then you don't require further consent, and something is has a higher threshold, then you go through a much more rigorous notification process. But even that is not because somebody may be interested. It's certainly not because someone is economically disadvantaged, which we can't actually consider. It has to be on environmental effects that you've actually identified through the formation of the district plan project. I know the councillors are very aware of the difficulties of large format operations and their effect on the CBD, and through the city vision and various other things, there's been a very strong drive from council to make the CBD the best it can be. But I think the backdrop to it is your district plan has to give certainty to the parties, and you're working through that now in your proposed district plan review. So I hope that helps.
Just a question. So what they said today would be a good submission to the district plan consultation.
So I think there is certainly, when the district plan, we have a part of the work that it will be looking at this particular issue, and you will do that firstly as a council, and then that will go out for consultation with the parties, like the inner city people and Taradale and the large format retailers as well, and then there'll be something that the council will then be happy with, hopefully at some stage, to put out for proper submissions later on.
Thank you. Your second point.
Just for an update for councillors, that Te Kohangahanga Atify opened yesterday in the Ocean Boulevard, and so just a update. Sorry, thank you, Richard. Just an update for everyone if you have had you not seen that. So that was just a quick update on that.
Can I ask a question about that, please, through you? There were some comments about this is the kind of thing that should have been in the women's rest, and I understand the reason why it wasn't there was because it's still being used for library books. Is that the case, or was that issue raised at all?
Yes, I'm happy to give some background to the project, which might be helpful for new councillors as well. So we had submissions from the National Women's Council, I believe, at our long-term plan 2 years ago, and they were asking for this kind of facility, but also in conjunction with the Women's Rest building in Memorial Square. The Memorial Square Women's Rest at that stage was considered earthquake prone. I understand since then it's had another investigative report and has come back better than it was found at that time. So we put $50,000 aside in our long-term plan to further a woman's rest style parent and child facility like what we've got in Ocean Boulevard. I think this council does need to have a discussion at some stage around what happens with the women's rest, and I'm sure that is on the work program somewhere.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? And your third item, dirty water.
Yeah, I still get calls about this, as I know others do, and we're at the infrastructure committee, so if I could put John on the spot just to give us an update if anything's changed since we last had a report.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I guess I'm under a bit of pressure here to respond. So with regards to our Three Waters program, or our top priority water program, which does include the three water elements. That we've been developing a strategy that looks at how we optimise our water supply network, as well as incorporating solutions for resolution of dirty water. And it'd be fair to say that the team have been putting in an inordinate amount of work to understand all the variables at play with regard to dirty water. And this can't be understated that it is actually quite a complex situation. So we have three main projects that we're focusing on that also work towards that higher level strategy of optimising our network. Firstly, the Napier district metered zone as a pilot project. So this is about being able to isolate a particular area within our water network from receiving water directly from our bulk water mains, and being able to feed water into that area from gravity feed from our reservoirs. So we're doing quite a bit of work on this at the moment to understand how we isolate and how we might undertake that. And the pilot part of that is to see how successful that might be. So that's progressing, and that we recommend that we proceed with that. Another initiative that we investigated was the ability to treat manganese at the bore. And this could involve a number of different processes, mainly either chemical treatment or green sand filter treatment. And our investigations to date have determined that a treatment plant of sufficient size and capacity, green sand filter, would cost in the order of $6 million. And at that point, we believe it's not cost effective to pursue, and our recommendation is not to pursue that. The third initiative that we are investigating is the development of a new bore in a location that is part of our recommended strategy going forward for the development of two main bore fields. And so that would involve 1 to 2 bores with the associated pipework to connect to our existing network. The selection of these locations has followed a multi-criteria analysis approach, part of which is the quality of the water in those locations. So we have identified a couple of suitable locations that we will seek approval to move forward on that do demonstrate very, very low manganese in our water. It's a naturally occurring element, so we probably won't avoid it altogether, but it's certainly at one of the lowest levels in any of our bores compared to some of our other bores. One of our other very suitable locations actually was in close proximity to the fault line that runs through Napier, and so we've had to discount that. So in terms of our second location, we're going back to our other options to reassess. So those are the main initiatives that we're currently progressing, and we will look to bring a more formal paper back to Council to highlight that overall strategy approach and to formalise those recommendations. Is there any further information you might like in that regard?
The timeframe for the Napier pilot program?
Oh, we're hopeful that we can deliver that within 3 to 4 months. The development of a new bore, it's probably worth teasing out a bit more information in that regard. We could give you a time frame, a very optimistic time frame that would require everything to go right, which I think in today's day and age we know that that's probably a bit over-optimistic of the end of the year, but probably 12 to 18 months in that regard. So what we need to do is get a consent to develop a test bore that we then test the water quality specifically in that bore. We have done a lot of water testing from all existing bores in the Napier area to inform our assessment of sites. But we'd be developing a test bore, checking the water quality within that bore and undertaking pump down tests to determine whether it can deliver the quantity of water at the required flow rates to augment our current supply and those bores that would be looking to decommission and replace with these new bores. At that point, we would then look to swap out those decommissioned bores with the new bores in our existing consent. To move beyond the replication or replacement of bores under our existing consent would require a new consent process. So we're in conversation with HBRC about that sort of framework and how we might progress there without over-encumbering the process to replace a bore.
Sorry, may I ask a question
Yes,
on that topic?
yes.
Just the time frame for the second dechlorinated water station, is it going to be this financial year or what?
Good question, Councillor Bogue. I'd have to come back to you with that. I haven't got an up-to-date forecast on that.
Thank you.
Not a question, but a request to add a minor item.
Yes.
So just through you, Mr. Chair, the minor item relates to impacts in Napier associated with the current situation in China. Given that our forestry slowed right down to almost a crawl, we're going to get a whole lot of other impacts that'll flow right down to our small businesses. Is there any opportunity for us to be able to request a report which might identify some of the key impacts that we're going to be looking at for our city and our region around activity, especially around Napier's capital plans? And I wouldn't mind knowing what's happening with the Ministry of Social Welfare and how they're going to be helping to work with those families that are impacted, that have been moving into a state of hardship if this pandemic goes as badly as everyone's forecasting.
Just first, have you finished? You've completed. Okay.
Sorry.
Who can answer that?
I didn't mean that. The
Make
report
sure
can
we
come back
very
later.
clear
I don't think anyone will
what
have that in their pocket.
Mr. Chair, I'll give it a crack.
You've been up.
That'll be really difficult for us to do. Anything which will be led will obviously be led by government, because it'll be a national response to it. Yes, there will be impacts regionally through meatworks, crayfish and logging, but any response is going to be nationally led. So I think we need to wait and see the advice that comes out from government in terms of their approach to managing it.
So just think of it, Mr. Chief Executive. So I agree that at a national level there'll need to be national leadership. I'm more concerned around at a local level. So if there was a conversation, because I know there'll be impacts that we won't see until it's too late.
Yeah.
So if there was at least a conversation starting with some of our partners here in Napier around how they're planning to address the impacts, that would be a great start for us so that we can look at what we can do at a local level.
Yeah, once again, Councillor, so it would be difficult to do that until we have an understanding in terms of the government support that would come out. Because the impact on the businesses, if any, which there will be impacts, will be managed through the government. So we're not going to know we're not going to be able to know what the impact is going to be until you know what level of support is going to come from government.
From a big picture perspective, I understand that, but
yeah. Because what you're asking for is pretty difficult to assess at this stage.
I understand that, so that's why I've narrowed it down to: can we confirm that we can start? Well, can we start a conversation with the likes of Ministry of Social Development to see whether or not they're seeing any developing trends and how they're planning to meet those? That at least is an indicator of what's happening now, which will give us a forecast into what we might be able to look at locally.
So a suggestion to that would be to use the Civil Defence Group and put it through that to government, through the Civil Defence Group, because it's all part of resilience.
Okay. Good suggestions.
I'd just make the comment from a health perspective that the District Health Board have a pandemic plan. So from that perspective, they will implement that should there be any indication.
There's actually a government pandemic plan.
I wonder if this might not be appropriate for the REDS, the Regional Economic Development.
It's something which we could put on the agenda to maintain a watch.
To look at it regionally.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Happy with those suggestions. Thank you, Chief Executive.
Thank you. So, I'll just close our open meeting now and ask for a mover to exclude the public. Councillor Taylor. Mayor Wise.
No, well, what we'll do, this room here needs to be